The Last Bird, The Last Stone. Syed Mahdi Shojai alias Khazadi. English text by Lisa Mulaki and Yuko Saito. Abraha, the king of Yemen, was leading his mighty army towards Mecca, the capital of Hijaz. He was about to attack Kaaba, the holy shrine of God. In the king's command were huge elephants, countless battle horses, and soldiers, all armed with helmets, shields, lances, spears, and swords. The earth shook under the heavy steps of the terrifying army, and the sky darkened with the rising dust. Nothing could stop their advance. Cities, villages, and houses in their way were burned and plundered. The slightest uprising by villagers was defeated by the orders of the commander, King Abraha. The king's hatred of Kaaba was so great that he would never be satisfied until it was totally destroyed. King Abraha envied Kaaba because it attracted the attention of all the believers. He felt mortified that the major tradesmen centered their business in Hijaz, leaving Yemen neglected. So, to attract people to his country, he built an elaborate, ornate, immense temple in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. But the temple did not stand long. No sooner was it completed than it caught fire and collapsed, reducing the king's ambitions into mere ashes. It infuriated the king so much that he was determined not to rest until Kaaba was completely destroyed. When King Abraha's army reached the outskirts of Mecca, he ordered his army to stop and camp there. It was mainly to finalize his assault plan and prepare for the invasion, but he also wanted to call Abdul-Muttalib, the custodian of Kaaba and chieftain of Mecca, to negotiation table. Abdul-Muttalib was well known as a great and honorable man, loved and respected by all. King Abraha was jealous of his fame as much as of the holy shrine. He wanted to see if he could humiliate this man by using his advantageous position. King Abraha walked up and down impatiently in his tent, waiting for the messenger to return with Abdul-Muttalib. He said to himself, "I have all the glory and grandeur, a kingly palace, my mighty army and officers, counselors and agents who are at my service. The whole of Yemen is under my command. And yet, I feel that my subjects do not love me in their hearts. But this man, Abdul-Muttalib," the king continued, "who possesses neither the force nor authority as I do, seems to be loved and respected so much. I cannot stand it. I must defeat him and wreck his prestige. And now that I have my army at the gates of his town, he will bow and beg me to change my mind and plead with me not to attack Kaaba. Yes, he shall definitely try to besiege me, not to destroy the holy shrine. Then both Abdul-Muttalib and all the inhabitants of Mecca shall come under my rule and do whatever I say. Or if I reject his plea and attack Kaaba, they shall have to embrace the defeat and destruction which they well deserve. In either case, it is worth meeting Abdul-Muttalib now to hear what he says. Before long, King Abraha heard the noise of a crowd outside the tent. He looked through the tent flap and saw the crowd and the soldiers clearing a way for Abdul-Muttalib. The king was taken aback and muttered, "What an imposing man!" An attendant came into the tent to tell him of the arrival of Abdul-Muttalib and his company. King Abraha returned to his seat and summoned them forward. The guards led them in. As Abdul-Muttalib entered, King Abraha involuntarily stood up and invited him to be seated. Then the king eagerly awaited his guest to ask him not to attack Kaaba. With an impressive calmness and solemnity, Abdul-Muttalib started to speak. However, he did not mention a single word that related to the possible raid upon Kaaba. It was as if he had been totally unaware of the extensive assault plan, which must have been obvious from the massive army encamped around his town. Abdul-Muttalib simply said, "King Abraha, your army has robbed me of my camels. Please order your men to return them." King Abraha was surprised and confused by Abdul-Muttalib's request. Then he regained his composure and said, "You have disgraced yourself with the words that just passed your lips. I have been told that you are a noble man, an Arab chieftain, a prophet, and the custodian of Kaaba. I expected you to be more concerned about protecting Kaaba than your camels." Abdul-Muttalib, as calm as ever, answered, "I am merely the owner of the camels. The holy shrine has its possessor who safeguards it." King Abraha was enraged. He thought that Abdul-Muttalib was showing off by disregarding the king's military power and putting him to shame by reminding him of the grandeur of Kaaba in contrast to the ruined temple of his in Sana'a. He searched his mind for the most insulting answer, but he failed to say anything and ended up ordering his men to return the camels. Now the king felt more hatred than ever for Abdul-Muttalib. As he saw the old man calmly leaving, he thought bitterly, "You will soon know that Kaaba is just a small, unprotected, defenseless shrine against the power of my elephant army." After the meeting, King Abraha wanted to demonstrate the might of his army. He arranged for Abdul-Muttalib to encounter the largest elephant in his army. Soon after he started walking towards Mecca, Abdul-Muttalib saw an enormous elephant blocking the way. But as he walked on towards it, the elephant knelt down like an obedient servant. Abdul-Muttalib laid his hand on the animal's head and whispered, "Take care. You have been brought here to help destroy Kaaba, the holy shrine of God. The elephant bent its head as if with great shame and regret. Neither King Abraham nor any of his men could believe what they saw. They suspected Abdul-Muttalib was a magician or an animal charmer. As Abdul-Muttalib continued on, King Abraham prepared to launch the attack on Kaaba. He sent a message to the people in Mecca that he was going to enter the city to destroy Kaaba. He told them that they would be unharmed if they stayed away and did not interfere. The people were thrown into a panic. "How can we possibly stop Abraham's army?" they asked. "We have no force, no troops, no ammunition to face it. Should we run away as Abraham suggested? No. Let's wait until Abdul-Muttalib comes back and instructs us." The people rushed to Abdul-Muttalib when he returned to Mecca. He confirmed that the assault on Kaaba and Mecca was certain to take place. "Isn't there some way to avoid it?" they asked. "Don't worry, good people," Abdul-Muttalib answered. "Kaaba is always guarded by its possessor, the Almighty God." "But what should we do now?" "Take shelter in the mountains and leave the rest to Allah." On Abdul-Muttalib's advice, all the people of Mecca, men and women, young and old, started leaving the city. Before joining them, Abdul-Muttalib stood alone in front of Kaaba and prayed in a quiet whisper. No one could hear him, but they were certain that he was praying to Almighty God. Meanwhile, King Abraham and his army found the path to Kaaba obstructed by an enormous creature. It was the huge elephant that the king had ordered to be put there to stop Abdul-Muttalib. The elephant refused to move. The king recalled the scene where Abdul-Muttalib had come across this creature and whispered something to it. Filled with crimson rage, he instantly ordered his men to kill it and move it at once to make way for the troops to proceed. Dozens of soldiers rushed and struck the motionless animal with their swords, spears, and lances. The elephant collapsed and died. It was when the troops began their advance again that the air was suddenly filled with a strange sound of commotion. They looked around in bewilderment and confusion. Nothing could be seen, but the noise became closer and louder with each second. "Where on earth is that noise coming from?" the king called out in alarm. "There should not be an army around here that would dare to challenge my troops." He rode his horse to a nearby hill to get a better view. He could see nothing at all for miles around. Then he noticed a dark cloud that seemed to drift nearer and nearer. This was the source of the noise. A strange fear filled King Abraham. What was the cloud? Why was it moving so fast? And why was it coming towards him and his troops? Before King Abraham could think clearly, the cloud had moved very close. It hung above him and his troops with a deafening roar. Suddenly, King Abraham realized that it was not a cloud at all, but hundreds of thousands of white birds, each one laden with red stones in its beak and claws. Then the birds started to drop the stones onto the troops. The stones rained down on the soldiers' heads and bodies, broke their bones and killed them instantly. Soon the field was covered with the battered forms of the soldiers, horses, and elephants. King Abraham was horrified to see his entire army wiped out. He wanted to run away, but in which direction? Maybe to Yemen? He pressed his legs against the flanks of his horse to leave the dreadful scene and to save his life. He gave one last look at the carnage before him. He saw nothing but a landscape strewn with dead bodies and running with streams of blood. In his confused state of mind, Abdul-Muttalib's words echoed in King Abraha's ears. The shrine has its possessor who safeguards it. Then he heard a sound in the sky. It was a white bird, holding a red stone in its claws, watching him as if it were a messenger of death. The last bird and the last stone for King Abraham. Then the king discovered that he could not move, and saw the stone coming towards him. It tore through his helmet, cracked his skull, and knocked him to the ground. Having completed the mission, the bird flew back to join its flock. King Abraham died in total despair, despairing that he had ever thought of destroying Kaaba, the holy shrine of God.